Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 40k Fireside podcast. I'm David Gaylard, and I'm joined by my good friend Vijay. Together, we discuss 40k and the meta from our perspective, along with events we've recently been to and those that have got coming up. So come on down to the Fireside and listen.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 46 of 40k Fireside. We're back again for another episode. But just before we start, this is something we've been thinking about doing, and we decided it's the right time to do it. We're just going to take a moment of silence in a second for one of our friends who's been in the 40k community and unfortunately passed away at the start of the year. It's the lovely Sid Sidhu, and his memory will always stay with us as someone who brought a lot of kind of excitement, energy, and joy to 40k events across the country. So, if we could all just take a second before we start the episode. All right, thank you guys. And today we are going to be chatting about something a little bit exciting because we've taken a bit of flack about how powerful God are. And what does my co-host Dave do? He goes and wins a super major with God. And this episode is going to be focused around God, around strategies, and Dave's incredible run at the South Coast Super Major. Dave, hello.
How you doing? How do you think I'm doing, man?
I bet you are buzzing right now.
let me just pop this one, bro.
Oh, beautiful.
That's a cold one. That's me, bro. I'm just chilling. It's all good. Just popping a cold one.
Oh, you're getting downvoted. I can see that. Oh.
Just David and his Forge World models. Oh, man. All he does is table people with indirect. It's so boring. No way God are any good. Doesn't know what he's talking about. Oh, man, yeah. This has been just the penultimate eclipse of internet memes and a vocal minority that has just kind of come to fruition with a great level of enjoyment for myself and vindication for Vic and I both. So before we go, I just wanted to address a couple of things. You know, obviously, when the Balanced Data Slate came out, Vic and I put a tier list, which was inaccurately interpreted as S tier, when in fact, we put factions as could win a super major, and, you know, both Vic and myself put guard at the top there, and the internet kind of collapsed in and of itself to some degree. Now, what I would say is there were a vast number of people, and I think people that have known us in real life and listen to the podcast and understand that Vic and I come from a perspective of, both extremely high-level play, but an analysis that reflects our wider team as well. It's not just Vic and I that you hear, it's Team Ignite and people that we chat with on a daily basis because they inform our decisions. But there were a large number of people, a large number of everyday human beings that pulled themselves, poked their head out of the Imperial salt mines and cascaded a rain of sodium down on our posts. And you know what? All you guys were wrong. You didn't know what you're talking about. And this is going to be another one of those episodes where if you're already starting to write that essay, just don't. Just sit back and listen. So here's the thing. There were a couple of comments that really stuck out to I think Vic and I. And so Vic, I don't want to rub too much salt in the wound, but there were some people that said, oh, if you do well, then we'll praise you, but if you don't do well, we'll mock you for being wrong. Well, I'm still waiting for that praise comment. There were people that said, oh, God can only win with these OP Forge World models that cost thousands of dollars, etc., etc. Well, obviously that's incorrect too. Or, people that just say, oh, it's only the terrain format in the UK that lets these people win. Oh, it's just because UK people play passive, etc., etc. Well, you're wrong as well. And we're going to discuss all these points. I want to chat through the 7 games that we went through and the playstyle and the really dynamic playstyle that Guard has. And Vic, were there any in particular memes that you wanted to address? Anything that you thought was unfair?
There were a few things because one is obviously that people said that we put God up there just to get attention, and
that was annoying.
It's kind of annoying because we are actually giving our genuine opinion here.
Yep.
The problem we had was that the objective statistics and the win rate don't match potentially how the prediction of kind of very experienced competitive players might see the game. And when you look at a set of rules and see what matchups is Guard going to struggle against, and I'd give this exercise to anyone listening. if you're trying to look for a faction that's going to try and win a large event, it has to have a small number of weak matchups in order to really have a consistent result, unless you get very lucky. But you have to kind of create your own luck with these things. And Guard really stood out alongside Necrons as being one of those factions for singles, at least in my opinion. I had Guard right at the top because I think,
Yep.
they've got a good matchup across the board and maybe one or two pressure matchups that they don't like playing against that could stop your run. But it's very rare and it's not the top of the meta as well. So then it came down to your comment you just made about terrain. And I've seen a little bit of people trying to cope with the fact that Guard are, winning a few events. Obviously, you've won a super major now, like not a small one, a decently sized super major.
Yep.
And the comments kind of change depending on what has won an event on the week. So you mentioned Forge World. So that week, Forge World was the broken thing in Guard. And then this week, obviously, you and the other person who won didn't have Forge World. And then, mentioning that, oh, yeah, indirect is why it's just tabling people. But then obviously the other person who won this week didn't have any indirect.
Yep.
And then people are like, okay, Guard are doing really well in the UK. It must be because the UK TC terrain favors Guard lists, or UK players are more passive and Guard can take advantage of that.
Yeah.
And I think that's really funny because, again, if you look at it, step back, forget the data for a second and just think about it. If you put the GW format of terrain on a piece of paper and look at it and think, okay, what am I going to do with my Guard on this? Look at that beautiful little line of sight blocking for all your artillery. It will take 3 turns for someone to get an angle on that if they wanted to attack it. And then you have open firing lanes through the middle that your vehicles can move through easily and your Bullgrin can stage more in the center of the board. GW terrain is obviously much better for Guard
Even better.
than UKTC. So terrain is not the thing here. People have to at some point accept that Guard is just a good army in the game right now. And the thing holding you back won't be these things. It's going to be something else. And I'm sure we can discuss that more, Dave.
And I think a common theme that you'll see when I talk about the games is actually the irony is that the UKTC terrain on some missions is so dense that my 2 big rooks, my tank commanders, almost can't even activate. So you can imagine a game where I can activate them is even more powerful, and activating them on GW terrain is way easier because they can drive over ruins that are of certain height as well, and they have big bases where you can sit your model entirely within. So yeah, I mean, so many misconceptions. It's been a bit of a roller coaster for the last 3 weeks. We had the mic drop situation, and people were kind of like, oh, it was a one-off thing, and then what, I just thought, let's just go and have fun. Vic said, hey, are you going to go play the South Coast Super Major? And I was like, nah, not at the moment. I'm just doing a lot of hobbying, really. And then I was like, all right, we'll go. And so I didn't play any games 10 days prior to the tournament. All I was doing was painting, and and it just goes to show, but the thing is, I've played so much Guard that I feel super comfortable. I already know all the matchups. Obviously, we're doing online scrims as well, so I was getting a game in there or whatnot like that, but a huge history of matches that I can recall on and positions that I know. So I was feeling really comfortable going into it.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic, Dave. What do you say we hit a little bit of music and we go on to the South Coast Super Major?
Yeah. See you guys in a bit. Fuck those haters.
Who's getting downvoted now? We're getting the upvotes.
Take that.
Yeah.
How do you like my community karma now? I'll cut it off there. I do like that interlude where we can just have free reign to talk absolute shit.
So, Dave, you played 7 rounds of this tournament, making it through to the top cut.
Yep.
And, before we were doing a thing where we were skipping a few games but I have a feeling, and we got some feedback about this, that there's something to gain from every game of 40k you play, some level of macro strategy, micro strategy, something we can give back to our listeners. So this time we are going to at least touch on every single game and every opponent that you played. And shall we kick it off with round 1?
Round 1.
So Round
Round one Death Guard, which is actually a pretty competitive army in today's meta, I think, right?
Yeah,
Arguably top 5, top 6, maybe?
I think so. You were playing against Steven here on priority targets, which is scoring 10 points, and this is on primary, and this is on a Dawn of War setup, which is one
Yeah.
of the weakest setups in UKTC. So they've just popped that as the first mission here, haven't they?
Yeah. And Dawn of War, things can get funky on Dawn of War, can't they? All different stuff can happen. So I think I went first in this game. Now, Steven had a pretty good list, but there's a couple of things that he needed to kind of change. I think one thing that I've realized with Death Guard is that you either have 0 Plague Burst Crawlers or you have 3. He had 2, which is kind of just the wrong number. Then he had the Dish Rod Terminators, which line up very poorly against my army. But, aside from that, it was the usual couple of 10-man bricks, some Death Guard Rhinos, he had Typhus, and a bunch of characters and whatnot like that. So, kind of pretty stock standard list, yeah.
With your guard, Dave, are you like, would you say it's more of a momentum army, like you kind of build up a little bit of pain over the game, or you do kind of push aggressively a little bit into them?
Yeah, I like to play the aggressive style, so obviously it depends on what army you're playing against, but I like to use all of my resources as much as possible. And there's a game 4 that we'll talk about where I texted the group chat saying I'm gonna have to throw my whole army at him, which is actually what I do a lot of the time. You're playing a pretty much, you've got an artillery component to your army, but your army is actually a mechanized infantry army. Like, that's how it wins games, in my opinion. The indirect creates an attrition aspect where they have to be active on the board, so it draws people into you, and then you're playing a mechanized infantry army, so you have a lot of board presence as well, and then you've got your 2 tank commanders as well there. So yeah, I'm generally speaking trying to create pressure through using my assets as much as possible, and I'm throwing out all my assets as fast as possible. Oftentimes if I can get my Cascan out and I go first on turn 1, where I can pre-game move and then disembark, charge, and wrap stuff up, then I am doing that as soon as possible. Yeah.
Really nice. And obviously we mentioned your list now, but just for people who didn't maybe listen to the previous episodes, do you want to just quickly run through what you were running?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it was pretty similar to what I played at Northampton, which at the time I said, look, I don't think I've got many unfavorable matchups here, so I was feeling pretty confident at that tournament as well, and lost to Josh Roberts after a close game there. So the list is Lord Solar, Ursula Creed, 2 tank commanders, 1 with plasma, 1 with multi-melter. 1 had grand strategist, but I literally forgot that and never used it. I don't even think I needed it, to be honest with you. 30 Kassakan, and then 10 Catachan jungle fighters, and then I've got infantry squad with the mortar for proccing fields of fire. Then I've got 2 manticores, 2 basilisks, all with heavy bolters, and I've got a chimera, which was incredible for me this weekend, and 2 scout sentinels, both with las cannons and hunter killer missiles as well. So one of the strengths of the army is that, and I think if you were to nerf guard, one of the things you would nerf is actually the amount of pre-game moves the army has, because it enables the army to stage a lot of its board control into the middle of the board completely safely, and that provides you the ability to hit people and create board control pressure right from the get-go. And a lot of times if you go second, for example, you're going to want to move your Chimera pre-game into a ruin a little bit further forward, where it's going to be very difficult or impossible to get an angle on, such that you can then disembark your infantry to indirect fire units off their side objective they're holding, and then create that primary differential there.
Sure. And so, you have one big unit of Bulgrin, and this is like a really interesting point of discussion between guard players in the UK, especially, where I feel like we're really pushing the limits of guard here. We're kind of innovating towards more optimal lists over here.
Yep.
And one of the discussion points is how many Bulgrin you take. And I do like that you've got one big unit, but how did you find the movement pathways for them in this
Absolutely
tournament?
Fine. One thing I wanted to address as well is I think I'm the only player in the world that doesn't play a command squad.
Oh yeah, you don't.
And I've never played it. So guess what? People ask me this all the time. They're like, "How do you not play with a command squad?" And I just tell them, I just keep him within 6 inches in order. Just play better, and that has been a big part of my list design philosophy as well, especially when I played guard at the Warhammer Fest as well, and when I played at Southampton. I had 0 fat in all of my lists. I'm not a fan of something. I will always cut something that if I played better, I could have gotten the benefit of that unit regardless. And the command squad is a great example of that, where if you map out, so for example, you go into any game, I pretty much know where most of my pieces will need to be for the first 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4 turns. So I understand where Leontis needs to be and where he needs to be deployed. I understand where my 4 artillery pieces are going to need to be and where they need to be deployed, and then what angles they might push if they need so as well. So there's obviously limits. You're not able to order your tank commander basically ever. You're not able to order your Bulgrin sometimes. But 80 points is 80 points, right? Like that's a whole Scout Sentinel and something else, for example, right? Or that's 10 Catachan Jungle Fighters and Grand Strategist, for example. So if you think about the impact a unit like 10 Catachan Jungle Fighters can have, it's absolutely enormous, right? You could maybe even flip someone's double primary in 1 turn, and they can pre-game move as well. So just play better. Keep your guy within 6 inches, and think about how you need to map out the game, multiple turns ahead of time, right?
That's such a playstyle thing, though, and it's quite an interesting design philosophy, because I'd be the person who take the command squad every time, like guaranteed. I'll cut damage from my list for those kinds of things. But yeah, I get it. And when you look at your list, it looks so lean. And I think that's a powerful way that you do build your lists once you get some reps in.
The only thing about that is that you lean into more inconsistency. So you do lose consistency because you can't order the tank commanders, which is quite big, right? So your tank commanders often will be hitting on 4s, for example. So that's a big thing to take into account. Or if you're playing 12 Bulgrin, or 18, then you probably play the command squad, because ordering them to move 9 is much more important at that point.
Definitely.
But if you've just got the 1 Bulgrin squad like me, I can slow roll it and play it on turn 3, 4, and 5, where I know it's going to be like a 6-inch charge, for example, right?
And this is a point where I'd come back to people saying that only one particular list works.
Yeah.
I think there is, it's not going to be massive variation. I think your archetype is probably the strongest archetype, but there's a lot of room to kind of tweak the amount of everything that you take in the list.
Yeah. We had so we're playing, Ignite is playing Germany in a scrim now, the national team, and the list I submitted there, I was doing innovations on my list that I played this weekend as well. I'm playing a Lehman Ross battle tank, the one that rerolls hits on objectives, for example. I've slipped in 3 more Bilgrins. For this tournament, I really wanted to try and make the Avenger Strike Fighter work, for example. I played probably, before I started painting, I played about 7 or 6 games of trying to make bombast field guns work, Medusas work, etc., etc. So I'm always trying to explore and invent new compositions. And there's a lot of depth to these lists, right? Like the Praetor, the Crasius, Scions are interesting. There's actually quite a lot of internal balance in the codex, and there's a lot of depth to it as well. I think there's legitimately quite a few ways to play the army.
Yeah, I agree. And the strength of it has come from the matchups across the board becoming a little bit more favorable, rather than guard becoming particularly significantly stronger than they were before.
Yeah, for sure. They're definitely the army that maybe benefited the most from the falling ceiling of army strength from, particularly Chaos Space Marines and Eldari, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So Dave, your round 2 was also against Death Guard, against Tom Lewis.
Tom Lewis from War Masters, yeah.
From War Masters, and it's on Supply Drop on Search and Destroy, which is the quarters mission.
Yes. So this is the quarters mission where you hold the objective at the end and you score mega amounts of points.
They disappear over time, exactly.
Yeah. Tom actually played really well. He had a bit more of an interesting Death Guard list. Instead of the Plague Burst Crawlers, he actually had Mortarion, which is... it's interesting because actually, normally Mortarion would be pretty bad into, say you play against Space Marines, right, and you've got Mortarion. Well, they just oath him and kill him with 3 tanks and he's dead, right? Like, Mercy's weakness and Oath of Moments almost kills him straight up. So, Mortarion, generally speaking, is quite bad. But Guard can actually struggle with these big monsters sometimes that have 4 up in 1, 5 up no pain, especially when you're overlapping kind of an inconsistency like a tank command on top of that, right? So actually, a lot of these games, I can't kill something like Mortarion. I have to grenade him over 2 turns, Meltamine him twice, tank shock him, and then hit him with probably stationary indirect or stationary platform as well. So pretty tough. But that game, I managed to actually shuffle all my indirect pieces up the board on turn 4. and then charge a unit he'd left on the objective at the end of the game with all my indirect pieces and put like 20 OC on it, for example, at the end there. So I was able to secure the 15 on my at the end of the 15 at the going to my 5, and then 15. Sorry, I think it was a 10 going to my 5 because the objective disappeared, and then the 15 at the end of the game, which is why the score was 84-31. But it's one of those games that could have been a lot closer based on who got the swing at the end of the game.
Yeah, that mission can cause blowout scores, so it makes sense there. But the next mission, is this the first time you played against Drukhari? You've ever played against Drukhari?
This is the first time I played against Drukhari.
Oh, man, and
the new one, yeah.
Of course, you hit them on Purge the Foe, which is kill more and hold more. But still, it looks like James put up a really good fight here.
Yeah, so we both took tactical, and the new Drukhari was really interesting. By the way, a guy called James Parrott Jung, lovely guy. Chatting to him afterwards, he didn't play on TTS. He doesn't even know what it was, so I was introducing him to that and everything. And he said to me before the game, he was like chatting to his team, and he said, "The only thing I don't want to play is guard on Philosopher." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm sorry, man. This is gonna be a really rough one."
Yeah, that's so rough.
So the thing about it is that Purge the Foe is very easy to score primary to a pretty high level, right? Like kill one, hold one, you can usually achieve for 8 points. So if you've got an army that can do tactical really well, it's actually difficult for me to stop him from getting 70 points, for example, right? Like 65 points. If he plays kind of cagey such that he's only extending to do his cards, tactical cards, and he's not bleeding too much, right? So yeah, super interesting. Drukhari were, they were... obviously they struggled a little bit into guard. I had the ability to kill his venoms right from the get-go, so I was able to pre-game move my Chimera into the middle of the board, and on UKTC I always put my Chimera in this one spot, and basically put it on the line and pre-gamed safely into a ruin in the middle, and then from there I had the option to disembark my Kasrkin 9 inches and then charge into their side objective ruin, which is really big because a lot of the times the strategies are going to be using my Kasrkin to flip objectives, but even if they don't shoot, I'm absolutely fine with that because I'm going to be paying 2 CP to respawn them. So a lot of the times I'll shell a unit on an objective to the point where they won't be able to kill my Kasrkin in return, and then they'll still be stuck in combat. So I can, so let's say you got like 10 incubi on a point, right? I'll shell them once, they go down to 7, I'll charge my Kasrkin in there, I'll Meltamine them, they go down to 5, and then I'll hit them in combat a little bit, I don't know, maybe they go to 3 or something, and then they hit me back. I've got 4 Kasrkin left, for example, where I'm contesting the objective, we're stuck in combat, and then he kills them in melee in his turn, or in shooting, I can respawn them, for example, right?
Yep.
So it's not always about getting the most damage out of your output profile into their units. A lot of the time it's about weakening positions such that your infantry can slow them down and contest points as well, which is something I did a lot.
Like, one thing I've noticed watching you play the guard list is feels like there's always like a very natural, this unit can now do this kind of option.
Yeah.
It's always like, okay, I can go do primary denial here. Okay, I have to go and hold this objective. And then there's some challenges in terms of correct target priority with your indirect fire, but that also gives you the option of playing a more passive game.
Yep.
So it's just strong. It's really good list design for singles.
But I played aggressive in all my games though as well, which is an interesting point because by aggressive I mean all my infantry played super aggressive every single game.
Because you know what happens when you play against guard. The UK scene is notoriously good just across the board. Like, anyone you play will just be quite a competent competitive player.
Definitely.
So most people are looking at it from a strategy perspective, and like, my only way of winning is often going to be being a little bit more aggressive than I want. Otherwise, if Dave does go for a passive approach, then I might lose anyway. Yep. And as soon as that happens, you end up in a situation where they're exposing more stuff and you can push into them and you have loads of stuff to do that with.
And that's the fine line that you draw in a lot of matchups, is that you play just aggressive enough where they need to push into you such that you've got springboards to really punish them more than they want to be punished, right? Like, the great thing about the Kasrkin squad is that if you disembark at 9 inches from an objective, right, you can string one end out with all your special weapons, and then another end out with the melter mine. And so you can string out a huge distance, shoot your special weapons one direction, shell an objective, and then charge that objective with your units, melter mine that unit, and then you take losses on the units that were never going to get in combat because they're strung all the way across the board, and you've still got the same amount on an objective. So it's such a nice unit to be able to just go out here, do this, do that, grenade you, blah blah blah, and then just charge on an objective, slice and dice a little bit, contest it. So you can get so much utility out of that unit, and most of the time your damage is just coming from 2 melters, 2 plasmas. I don't think my sniper rifle wounded once the entire tournament, but that's basically where the output is coming from. And the ability to do grenades plus melter mine gives you mortal wounds that negate whatever armor save your opponent has as well.
I feel like you're inspiring some guard players right now with these tactics, because that's what it's about. People love hearing about how you can ooze the maximum kind of effectiveness out of your units, and I think a lot of people are going to miss the amount that you can get out of these guard units. So that's damn cool, man.
I think I probably charged an average of twice per turn in all my games, for example. Which a lot of people are like. They're like, what are you talking about? But my Chimera is charging, my Jungle Fighter is charging, all my Kassagan charging, my Tank Commander, charge it, You gotta, there is a skill that a lot of players have to, Guard is, playing a list like this is, there's several things that go into it, obviously. These are the micro tactics, of course, those are always nice, but you need to always manage the threat ranges from your opponent, right? Because fundamentally your army is really poor at getting out of bad situations, right? So the fundamental thing you have to do every game is you have to analyze how your opponent can get you in bad situations, and you have to deploy everything such that you can avoid that from ever happening. Which sounds easy when you think about it on paper, but when you've got raiders that can rapid ingress and do this and do that, then oftentimes you make some counterintuitive plays, but it pays off in the long run, because I don't think anyone was in my deployment zone almost the whole tournament, apart from Manichima, who can just fire and fade units, stuff like that. So keep them away from your deployment zone. Your castle is one thing, but you got to use all your resources to do that.
Speaking of Manichima, you ended up playing against him in round 4, and I'm sure everyone's heard of Manichima, but he was last year's global ranked #1 player. He's currently ranked #1 in the global ELO rankings, which ranks players on their individual performances. And he also won World Champs. So he's won everything. So Manny is a brilliant player, and you've drawn him on round 4, Dave.
Probably the worst round I could draw him on, actually. I thought it was good in hindsight. So the mission is hidden supplies and an angular deployment. Scorched Earth, your hidden supply Scorched Earth is on angular deployments. And, Vic, typically the angular deployments are quite good for shooting armies. But actually, because I'm playing 2 tank commanders, there's a ruin on UKTC where your side objective is held within a ruin that's at such a dense angle that you can't even rapid ingress a tank and then move it and shoot into that ruin. Or maybe you can only just do that. So that ruin is really hard to breach if you're playing big move and shoot platforms that aren't fast, right?
Yeah, I think he could hide his whole army all game if he wanted to here.
Exactly right. And the angles I have to take are obviously extreme. In hindsight, really tough one. Now, Manny is absolutely phenomenal player, much better player than myself. So he had a really good strategy.
What was he running?
Oh yeah, so he's playing he's playing MSU Eldari. So he had about 17 units, something like that. 2 units of warp spiders, 3 support platforms of D cannons, 3 units of scourgers, had a wave serpent, 3 units of fire dragons, 3 units of hawks, type of stuff, right?
He leaned into the kind of fire and fade mechanic, because he went Yanari as well. He included 3 units of scourges, 3 units of shadow specters. So he's got 6 units moving 6 inches after they shoot. And then obviously he can then fire and fade another one, keep another unit near a wall to phantasm it back. So kind of 8 units doing that. Just kind of dirty,
Yeah, it's a tough one to deal with. Tank commanders are pretty atrociously bad against that. But I've obviously have the backup. I've got the indirect, right? So Manny has the ability to fire and fade behind objectives and be uninteractable, and I've got the indirect as well to catch that, right? So against an archetype like that, unless you're playing a melee orientated list that can have dudes and rhinos, etc. It's a pretty hard archetype to chew through. Especially on this mission where we're quite far apart from each other. And so Manny actually I thought he was going to go tactical, but he actually went cleanse and deploy teleport homers, which would certainly set the pace of the game, because as soon as he went cleanse and teleport homers, I asked him how many units had pistols in his army. And basically my strategy, as soon as he went that, was to throw my entire army at him. Because I needed to be on his objectives, in his face, tagging all his units as much as possible, to make sure that it limited his ability to A, use CP to fall back and shoot and charge, and then B, his ability to do actions as well. And C, if we play like a 6-turn game, there's not a guarantee that I get to kill all his units, but there is a guarantee that he gets to score all his points, probably. So it's a bit of problems to overcome there.
Yeah, interesting challenge. You said you were aggressive there, but was he aggressive as well?
Yeah, so he actually, it was quite interesting, because Manny kind of said, I'm going to play for the points, I think this is a loss, etc. And he put 3 units.
Don't listen to him. Just never listen to him when he says that.
He put 3 units of Scourges and 3 units of D-Cannons all in reserve. So I was like, okay, it's interesting. And that's kind of what I messaged you saying before. I was like, I think he'd probably do that. So that's what he ended up doing. And, the ability to cleanse and deploy homers puts a lot of secondary pressure on your opponent, because he can basically get 7 secondary points every turn, right? And Manny's extremely good at mapping out the points game. So I knew that he was going to be razor sharp on how much secondaries I had, how much secondaries he had, and the primary. The problem here is that it's the same mission where the Ruin blocks all line of sight getting to it. So it's actually really easy for Manny to just stay on 2 objectives and score 10, because the maximum we can both score each turn is 10. And we each have 3 objectives. So to deny someone's primary, you need to deny 2 objectives effectively, right? Whereas previously, you would have to deny 1 objective to create a 5-point differential, right? So that worked out really, really well for him. And so I was a little bit worried right from the get-go, actually, because Manny ended up going first. And the reason why going first is really big here is because I have 1 turn to screen all of his Scourges and D-Cannons coming in as deep on the board as he possibly wants. Now, one thing I did almost every single game was I would deploy my tank commanders and everything like that, and oftentimes I'd put 1 tank commander and a scout sentinel just back into strategic reserve. And you know what? I'd rapid ingress my tank commander like almost 60% of my games I played. So people might think that's a bit weird, but it's such a big static piece that you need to invest into it to get into the game, really, because I'm really worried about lots of my army just not being able to activate into it. Sure, I've got the indirect and that's great, but the reality is I might not be beating him on the secondaries, because it's really hard to create a primary differential. Awesome. So so Manny goes first. Both pretty passive turn 1. My indirect does well turn 1. I think I killed like 14 models or something like that turn 1, which I don't know if it's that over drastic. Like, I think that's, I'm shooting at stuff with 4-up saves, right, and 5-up invulnerables. So I'm going to kill that, and that kind of sets the baseline for the level of attrition that my indirect will hopefully achieve every game. But so Manny goes in for a huge turn 2. I think he realizes after turn 1, he says, the level of attrition from the indirect is going to be way too much. I'm going to go all in on your objective. So goes all in on my top objective, brings 3 D-Cannons in, away from a position where he can't... I want to actually be able to outflank my tank commander and then shoot him. So there's actually a huge... this is the kind of level that he plays at, right? There's a point where he's got 2 units of warp spiders and 2 CP, and there's D-Cannons all on one top side of the board. Now I've got my tank commander in outflank, and he knows I could rapid ingress it. The thing is, I know he knows I could rapid ingress it, and I know he's got 2 CP for fire and fade. So he measures out that my tank commander can't get within 24 inches to shoot his D-Cannons, and it would be in the middle of nowhere, tucked into the corner of the board, right? So it's not going to impact anything. And I know that he knows this, so I don't rapid ingress my tank commander up there, because I knew that actually he could fire and fade his warp spiders around my tank commander, which would block it for the entire turn. And I thought, if I get time warped already on one of my tank commanders, I'm going to have not enough tempo in the game. So I actually bring it in on a weird location down the opposite side of the board, where I can't even shoot his support platforms with my big demolisher cannon. But it's going to give me the ability to move 10 and charge anything on one of his objectives. So I thought that was probably good enough.
Nice.
So he comes down, his D-Cannons do good work, his warp spiders do good work, and his Scourge just come down and instantly kill one of my tank commanders. He's got the Shroud running unit that spots it for lethal hits, rolls like 7 lethal hits or something like that. I pass like 1 save, and he just nukes my tank commander straight off the back of the battlefield with his Scourge, and then fires and fades them all into the ruin. And I kind of expected this to happen because the tank commander is so big and static that if he starts his Scourges in Deep Strike, there's basically nothing that prevents him from just coming down and nuking it. I have to spend so much on screening to prevent him from doing that. It's just not worth it, in my opinion. So I was like, you know what? He's going to come down and do that. That's fine. I can't do anything about that. I'll have my indirect to kill his Scourges like the next turn, for example. But going into my turn 2, I took a lot of damage, and Manny was feeling pretty confident at this point. And what I ended up going for this turn was I went for some Scourges, but I actually focused on killing the D-cannons with my indirect fire, because the D-cannons were what was going to give him a lot of value in the long run. And if I could move away from his Scourges such that he couldn't hit the hugely important parts, then I think I was going to be able to weather the storm. So actually my turn 2 goes, and Manny passes I don't even know, like 13 out of 15 5-ups on all his Warp Spiders, and I'm like, okay, that's not great. What happens is he's rolling his dice, and they're rolling a bit poor. He's like, fuck that. I'm gonna open these dice that they gave everyone who came to the event, and they're the crew kill team dice. Oh my god! As soon as he ripped these dice open, bro, they were insane. Dude. I was just like, he's fucking kidding me right now. So my turn 2 goes, and I don't kill anywhere near as much as I was hoping with my direct shooting. So I was hoping I'd kill, my direct shooting would pick off Warp Spiders and stuff like that, great, and then I'd be able to pick off 2 D-cannons and then some Scourges. And I was hoping, if I pick off 2 D-cannons, hopefully the 3rd D-cannon just whiffs, rolls 1 shot, does 6 damage or something like that. Okay, cool. That doesn't end up happening, and he has another great turn. The problem is that my game plan for the long run is to create a backfield weakness, because he needs to come to the middle of the board to do his actions and his secondaries and prevent me from scoring. A lot of my game plan is to create weaknesses in his backfield such that I can respawn my Kasrkin and eventually hit his backfield, and probably likely draw tactical cards that are gonna reward me for being in his deployment zone. And that's kind of what ends up happening. I'm able to burn his home field objective. I get Kasrkin in there eventually. They're able to shoot, and I made a 9-inch charge. So that was once I made the 9-inch charge, it was kind of game over. But it was a really close game that Manny could have won actually if he had played one turn a little bit differently, which just goes to show you, I think, the impact that the mission had on a matchup that's generally speaking pretty bad. On corners, I think even if I went second, it would have been a lot easier for me, because both of the objectives are probably in the middle. My tank commanders can actually see stuff and shoot. My Kasrkin are right next to his deployment zone. It would have been a significantly easier game for me on any other mission, but this one was kind of unique. But that was why it was fun. Manny was a pleasure to play against, and it created a good dynamic, yeah.
Well done, Dave. Yeah, nice win. You managed to get an 80-62 win there.
Yep.
And you've knocked Manny out, and you're on to round 5 of this tournament. I know, 1 more to go. And you're playing against Ultramarines. Is this a Vanguard list, right?
Yes, this is a good list too. Daniel Latham. This is actually the list that someone submitted for a scrim game against us. I think is 1 point of difference. He's playing Vanguard Ultramarines. He's got the infiltrating, where they had aggressors previously, he swapped that for eradicators. 6 interceptors, 3 interceptors. Big Centurion devastated blob, a couple of units of scouts, etc., right? This is a really good list, and actually it's really good against me. The thing is, O'Brien actually played a practice game against us recently, and he wrote it up in our team chat, and I actually took a huge amount of learnings from that. Because I haven't played against this list. I actually have played against this list, but it was with the aggressors.
Yes.
So, we're on corners here. Daniel's super nice guy. And yeah, he went first as well, which is not great for me, because ideally I want to go first here, get my Bulgrin tucked into good positions where he needs to. It's really hard for him to come from deep strike and reserve and shoot them, which is really ultimately what ended up happening. But yeah, a couple of cool tricks on this one. So this is the first time I used the double fields of fire, because these marine builds have armor of contempt, right? So you shoot them with the mortar, and then they armor of contempt, and then you fields of fire, so you're still AP1 effectively against their units. So an eradicator, for example, takes a 4-up save with armor of contempt against your manticore, even if he fields of fire. But if you shoot the mortar, then you shoot the basilisk, and you have 3 CP, then you can fields of fire again. So you can actually be double AP against this unit. So your manticores go to AP4, which is effectively AP2 against their eradicators. And that basically gives you another 25% output against them. So every 4 models you kill, you're probably killing another model, right? So that's the first time I went for that. What I did was actually disembark, pre-game move my Chimera on turn 1, disembark it all my Kasrkin to screen the board such that he can't bring up his eradicators into reserve because I'm within, I think it's like 3 inches or something like that. So just advance them out, or I think I charged something in the middle, slingshot it around, and then was it within 3 inches, and I basilisked his eradicators, so they couldn't bounce back up, and they only moved 3 inches base, and then -2 to the advance, right? So most of his squad couldn't actually clear the wall because his character was up against the wall as the first model. So that's a little trick that you can do against a list like this if you've got a slow mechanic. You don't have to necessarily prevent them from coming back up and down. You can actually just be within range of them so they can't do that in the first place.
Nice.
But the big problem is the Centurion devs, right? Because these guys are so good against my army. This... and this is where UKTC differs a lot from GW. On UKTC and corners, it's actually very difficult to hide all of your indirect. And actually, you can't actually hide 4 pieces of indirect. Vic, you probably know this when you played 3 Night Spinners, right? You can't actually park all of them in your deployment zone because armies at Deep Strike can come down on the board edges and shoot right into your deployment
You've
zone.
got to be super creative and careful when you're playing that.
Exactly, yeah. So you have to put your Basilisk, I had to deploy it and then move it into a ruin on turn 1, for example, right? And then mitigate him not being able to charge it. But the thing is, this list is quite CP hungry, and if you stack on them using Armor of Contempt in addition, it can kind of run out of CP. So what I realized is that he wants to always use the +1 Ballistic Skill, +1 AP, right? Of course. Insanely good strat. And then against my indirect, he's going to want to use Armor of Contempt. But that means he doesn't have enough CP to then use the bring up and put back down. So what I realized is I could pressure his Centurion devs when they're on the battlefield. I could use the Fields of Fire against them, and if he doesn't Armor of Contempt, he's going to be on 4-up saves with the Centurion devs against my Manticores, right? And Basilisks as well, because they're 4 wounds, so the Manticores and Basilisks are both good against them. And then if he does Armor of Contempt, he can't pick them back up. So it's a really tough position for them, because they're going to take a lot of damage, or the Basilisk is going to slow them and they move 2 inches, right? Which is, fundamentally not doing anything. The flip side to that is that when they do Deep Strike, they basically kill anything they look at. And they have 2 brilliant profiles. Their grenade launchers are AP3, and then their las cannons reroll everything, and they're AP4. So their las cannons can target a tank, kill it. They can target 2 infantry squads almost in split, kill them both, right? So
nice.
It's a piece that you can kill 3 units a turn, so it's a lot of pressure. My opponent, he made one fundamental mistake this game, is that he let me Meltamine and then slingshot a unit of Bulgarin off his scouts. Then I could then tuck into an objective on the side that was hidden behind a ruin. And what that let me do is have a unit that was tucked in where he couldn't shoot from Deep Strike. And I knew his whole army basically needs to come down and shoot from Deep Strike, so that was a huge pain point for him. In addition to that, the tank commanders are actually really, really good against his army for a change, as long as they don't die in combat, because he's fundamentally a shooting army that needs to trade up, and he needs to carve out parts of the board. But because the tank commander can shoot on death on 2+, you can actually get value out of it no matter whether or not he gets the jump on you. So these units like Inceptors, for example, they want to come down, shoot one thing and be safe. The thing is with the indirect and the tank commander is that those units are often priced up to be quite expensive, right? 6 Inceptors 250 points or something. So even if he comes down and shoots and kills something, I get to shoot them on death, which is probably going to kill 3, and then my indirect gets to pick them up. So he's actually paid quite a premium to just do something simple like that as well. Yeah. It was a bit of a tough one. But yeah, there's a lot going on. As a lot of these lists that use Armor of Contempt a lot against your indirect, it's about managing and stressing their CP such that they can't use their other strats in addition to that.
And obviously you have perfect counters to that with Fields of Fire, so you can play around it. The AP breakpoints are very nice on your weaponry as well, so...
And he's a list, that's a list that doesn't have a lot of opportunities to hold the primary, right? Against me just charging you with 10 Kasrkin or 10 Gattachan or something like that, okay, it's either your Centurion Devastators or some scouts that are on objectives, but if I kill off all your chaff as soon as possible, then, it's really hard for you. You have to dedicate your 1, 2, 3 big pieces on those objectives, which means that I could, got a lot of room to play around them, right?
Dave, I'm just looking through the list of the person you played next. And this was James Hobbs on Tau Empire.
Mm-hmm.
And I have never seen a Tau list like this. This is like a triple broadside list, triple times 2 broadsides. This is awesome.
Yeah, so we cut to the top 4 now, and
Yes.
it was myself, Ed Watts, James Hobbs, and the player that Ed Watts played, which I will look up now, a Mr. Nicholas Willingate, and Aldari. So, to be honest with you, I was
It's pretty good.
Yeah, obviously it lines up pretty well against me. It was probably the player I was worried about the most. Tau was a matchup that I was very confident in. I've played it lots. I played at WTC last year on Death Watch though, but it's always been a 15-5 matchup for guards, so it was interesting. But fundamentally, an army like Tau just doesn't have enough board presence to hold objectives. And I don't know how many times I've said this right, but for example, a typical Tau player will hold the objectives with Ghost Kill battle suits. So we're playing Hammer and Anvil Hidden Supplies. There's 4 objectives in the middle of the battlefield. Now he's going to infiltrate his battle suits there to hold the middle objectives, right? With Lone Op, which to be honest with you is quite powerful against my army, and he's got 2 blanks, so he can blank melter shots and stuff like that as well. So and they're like 2 up base set, -1 to hit. So you would think they're really good against guard, but the best way I've got of dealing with them is I just walk up to them, melter mine them, chuck a grenade at them, and I just stand there on the objective. And I don't even charge them. I'm just like, okay, OC3, I'll put 3 guys on there.
Yep. Done a bit of damage. Yep.
Yeah. And then next turn, I do the same thing. So my Chimera, I just put the next unit in the Chimera, jump out, grenade you, melter mine you. So
that's the combo.
That's basically what I did for like 4 turns. And he had some of his broadsides in reserve. I redeployed my tank commander back into reserve, of course, as well. And I actually rapid ingressed my tank commander on a side flank because I knew that he was probably going to try and get greedy on one of the flanks and just commit just enough on his deep strike phase such that he could kill both flanks. But what I realized is that if I rapid ingress, he's going to be undercommitted on one side, and my tank commander will have a huge opportunity to just direct shoot something, which is quite rare against Tau. It's actually quite hard to get use out of a tank commander against an army like this because you either have to slug up the board and then they could just come down and shoot you because you're a turn behind them, basically. But if you rapid ingress on a turn they're undercommitted, then it's going to be really hard for them, right? And suddenly you can trade up. You can get the first blow, which if you get a first blow with a tank commander is it's basically like what else do you want, right? Like it moves 10 inches, mate. So what else do you want? So actually, funnily enough, he shot and killed both my tank commanders on turn 2. One of them was kind of a cheeky angle. I got to kill like 5 Vespid with it, that's fine. Then I rapid ingress my tank commanders, and I didn't realize he could actually shoot a line with a laser pointer through the middle of the board with his broadsides, and he one-shot that. But my tank commander, it still got to shoot on death. And, it just killed like 1 broadside and almost 2 almost 2 Tetras, right? But I was like, I'm perfectly fine with that. As long as the game is getting started and he's committing to the board, then I'm perfectly fine because ultimately that's what I need the game to do. I need the game to be in a dynamic, active place such that he has to commit to the board. I can see where he is, and then we can get the game started. So a nice one. Yeah.
This is a bit of a weakness that Tau have, is that they don't have a strong secondary game and they don't have a strong primary game, and they're susceptible to getting primary denied.
Yep.
They have the most incredible direct line of sight shooting.
Yeah.
But that's
with the the broadsides with the Tetras. Oh my word!
I know
they destroy.
Especially after turn 3, when you get exploding hits and stuff, it starts to get a little nutty. But
how are Tetras 80 points?
They're so strong. Tau really need that just to underpin their army, but there's a bit of an internal balance problem with that.
Yep.
But yeah, Tau are in a tough spot where sure you can push through, but then you're going to hit a good player, and like in this case where it's just like, okay, if we just follow these couple of steps over and over again through this game, you're going to lose by a little bit. So what are you going to do about it? And Tau really struggled to do something about it. So, yeah.
It's I kind of love playing those games, to be honest with you. It's kind of like you just know how the game's going to play before you even start the whole game.
Yeah.
You're just like, you put stuff there. I put all my guys out. I put all my guys out. I put all my guys out. You haven't got enough OC. If you do commit, I turn around the corner and blast you. Whenever your 6-man squad deep strikes, next turn I'm going to hit it with all my indirect with 1 field of fire, and it's just like I know you're going to lose like 3 suits, for example, and
he's got no options, so fair enough.
And ironically, he was playing he had a bit of a weird loadout actually. He had broadside, he had Crisis Brick, 5-man Crisis Brick with 10 plasma rifles and
Yes.
5 missile pods. So
Interesting.
it's quite interesting, isn't it? Thought it was a bit different.
People
but,
are starting to move a little bit away from the cyclic outside of commanders, which is kind of interesting. But I understand that you don't want to be giving up too many of your suits just by your own shooting.
Sure.
It's fair enough.
The only thing is that's terrible into Bulgrin, especially when I roll kind of well on my saves, although I don't think it made a difference in the game. But -1 damage is obviously really good against that. And if you just kind of come down and kill 4 Bulgrin with your 450 point brick that's then going to get shot by all my indirect, that's perfect profiles into it. Yeah, it's really tough.
Makes a lot of sense. But Dave, you managed to win that one as well. What are you doing? Oh my goodness. And you're moving into the finals against one of the greatest men in 40k. The mighty Ed Watts on his Grey Knights. How did this go?
Yeah, I just want to say, if you're not a UK listener, you probably don't know any of these names or something like that. Like, Ed Watts is a guy who's been around the scene for a long time. Super lovely guy. We last played when he played Custodians and I played Crusher Stampede, for example, right? So a long time ago. But, he's always been around. We always chat him. He's part of Team England as well. So, really respectable player who's been putting in a lot of effort lately with Grey Knights. But he's been improved a lot as a player, I think.
Yes, definitely.
He was really focused. Of course, right? But, Ed and I, we know each other, so it's super nice where you can just have, like, a finals game with your friend. He hasn't won a big tournament before, so I actually, deep in my heart, I really kind of wanted him to win. Because I'm like, it'd be so good. But at the same time, I knew that he wouldn't want to, like, win a game like that, So I was like, I'm giving my best, and we'll play. So, really interesting game. So, unfortunately, this is on the mission that's actually really bad for me again, especially against armies like Ed's. It's on the mission that's angular deployments. The same mission where the side ruin is held by an objective where you can't deep strike and shoot something on it, which makes it really tough to play because I have 2 tank commanders and, a lot of something, obviously that's about 400 points in my army, so it's really hard for me to activate my tank commanders on some of these boards, especially this one mission, which I ended up playing in a lot of my really tough games. So, once again, outflank and strat reserve. But I guess before I do that, we should get on to Ed's list. Ed was playing Grey Knights.
Yes.
I quite liked his list. It's been a while since I played against Grey Knights, but I did have a practice game against them against a South African player a couple of weeks back. So I was kind of grateful for that because I kind of knew what they were doing. But Ed and I are the type of people that if you forget something, whatever like that, we're just like, hey, obviously you don't want to do that, mate. Like whatever, take it back.
He's really
obviously
chill.
You could have screened me here or something like that. Yeah, cool, it's fine. Just move it back. Who cares? Right?
Ed loves his librarians, doesn't he? With these little MSU Terminator units.
Yeah. So he's got 2 librarians, a tech marine, a grandmaster. He's got 3 Terminator squads with 5 mans, strike squad, 2 interceptor squads, and 3 Nemesis Dread Knights. I thought this build was quite good.
But
solid. I don't really know much about Grey Knights, to be honest with you.
I think he's gone with the grandmaster there with Inescapable Wrath that gives him +1 to charge out of deep strike, and it's kind of budget Drago. It's 15 points cheaper than Drago, but Drago gives you +3 to charge rather than +1. So he's probably like really trying to find the points for that and just couldn't. But he did manage to get 3 MSU Terminator, and that's a big thing he likes as well, the MSU squads rather than the big chunky squads.
Yes.
For me personally, I like the chunky squads. I think that's quite good in Grey Knights, but obviously not great against Manticores.
No,
I would say.
In fact, the 5 mans are a lot better against Manticores because you have the option of resurrecting them. So if the prospect of shooting a 10 man with 2 Manticores or shooting, 1 5 man with all my indirect, I'd rather shoot the 10 man, right? Because let's say I kill you down to 5 guys, you resurrect 1, I've netted 4, right? If I shoot my indirect and then kill, into a 5 man, I'm going to lose the rerolls to hit eventually because they're going to be less than 5. Well, they're a 6 man because they have the librarian. So I've got leeway of 1 model there. And then, you're going to resurrect 1, so I lose a lot of my efficiency, and then you resurrect 1 as well. So I net gain like 2 as opposed to 4.
How did you find the output in his list?
The output was quite low.
Yeah.
So I think Grey Knights do definitely struggle with the output. So I'll run you through the game because there's a critical term with the output that kind of exemplifies this, right? With 2 different units. So I actually end up going first, which I think is probably not great here. Primarily because it just gets a whole nother turn of his army faction secondary working, right?
So teleporting.
And realistically, I'd rather have more CP. So going into my turn 1, I'd rather have 3 CP. It's quite a big breakpoint for what I'll explain. So end up going up first. And my cards are horrendous. Like,
I was getting
bad.
live play-by-play from Manny, who was there
Yeah.
on the Team England chat, and he was saying all the cards they were awful.
Awful, mate. You don't even know the MacGyver shit I had to pull off to get these secondaries, mate. Like, I think turn one was behind enemy lines, capture them in the outpost, right? So I was like, great. Or it was like assassinate or something like that, right? I was like, great, okay, that's terrible. So I end up having to slingshot one of my Kaskin units into his deployment zone off charging a Nemesis Dread Knight on like a 7, so just so I can Melter Mine it and get it in combat, just so I can do my secondary. So that's how I play, right? So okay, not great, but I'm hoping next turn I get a little bit better, right? Next turn he dumps all of his units on his side objective, right? I'm like, okay, yeah, that's fair enough. Of course I'll probably do that. Yeah. My turn 1, I ended up shooting his strike squads and splitting into a bit of his chaff, which in hindsight probably wasn't completely optimal. Probably would have been better if I just went all in on one of the Terminator bricks, but we'll get to that in a second. Then so my turn 2, my cards are Tempting Target and Bring It Down. I'm like, well, that's pretty bad. His 3 Dread Knights are in his deployment zone behind ruins where I can't shoot them, and the Tempting Target he chooses is where he's got like 27 OCR. So I'm like, okay, great. So this actually comes back to that's something I said at the very start of the episode, is like, the Kasachkin unit is really good because I've got 10 Catachan Jungle Fighters just outside that objective, and I can slip like 5 of them on or something like that for 10 OC, right? Okay, cool. He's got 5 strike squads and a unit of 5 Terminators, which end up being like 22 OC or something like that, and a character or something. And then so what I do is I string out my Kasachkin such that I can get like 2 plasmas into like a little strike squad or something like that, which is great because the plasmas line up super well against them. And then I can charge back down onto the objective. And then, so this turn I had a big decision. How do I want to sculpt the game? Do I want to hit his backfield? Do I want to go for a Dread Knight? Or do I want to make sure that I'm closing in on the points for the secondaries? So I was like, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm on like 4 CP or 5 because I haven't spent any. Shoot my mortar at your Terminator squad, use Fields of Fire. Shoot my Basilisk at your Terminator squad. Do you want Armor of Contempt? Armor of Contempt. Okay, so you're back to taking 3 up saves against my Basilisk. Kill 1 model, kill 1 Terminator. Fields of Fire again. Right, so now I've lined up 2 Manticores that are going to be able to shoot into this Terminator brick, and they're going to be AP 4. So even with his AOC, he's taking 4 ups. Roll the first Manticore, 6 shots.
Oh, of course, let's go.
8, which is basically 8 attacks, right? 8 attacks, all hit, 7 saves, fails like 3 or 4 of them or something like that on the first go.
Bang.
Boom, done. And next Manticore, shoot it, kills 1 Terminator, puts the Librarian on 1 or something. Next Basilisk, boom, kills the Librarian, or something like that, right? No. I killed that squad with 1 Basilisk and 2 Manticores, and then the other Basilisk I shot into the Interceptor squad that was on that point. And then what I did was I charged that Interceptor squad with my Kasachkin, Melter Mined it, because I was like, how many attacks do you have? He's like, I got like 3 each something. So I was like, well, if I Melter Mine you, hopefully I kill 1, or I deal 1 mortal, I deal 1 damage in combat, you should have a maximum of like 6 attacks, which means you can't flip the point. And then that's what ended up happening. So I flip the point and get Tempting Target, which is, an example of where like you want to chip stuff out on objective, charge with the Kasachkin, flip, get your secondaries, etc. Now, next turn goes by and I'm like, okay, that worked pretty well. The double Fields of Fire, like, that was quite good. If I can pull that off again, it'll be good. Because Ed's drawing like 10s on his secondaries, like the easiest cards ever too, right? He's like, oh yeah, do this 5 points, do that 5 points, do this 5 points, do that 5 points. I'm like, fuck man, it's really hard. But what he did was on his turn 2, he, this is how I was able to kill the squad. On his turn 1, he deep struck 3 inches to try and kill my Manticore with the Terminator unit. With the psychic ability of the Librarian and his psychic attack and a heavy side cannon. Now, he ends up bringing my Manticore to like 4 wounds, you see. And I was like, okay, that's a fair play. Because if you kill the Manticore on turn 1, it's absolutely huge. Completely changed the game. But what it allowed me to do, in hindsight, Ed and I were chatting about this, is it allowed me to spot his unit before I popped the sigil with the Scout Sentinel. So all of my indirect was hitting on 2s, re-rolling 1s into that squad. So even my Basilisks, so I basically did that, I spotted it, and then I went, I'll shoot with my Tank Commander, he vigils back onto the objective that has a tempting target, right? I'm like, okay, bugger. But then I'm like, well, all my indirect is on 2s rolling 1s now, and so all my Basilisks and Manticores are basically full rerolls to hit, which is what allowed me to really clean up that 5-man brick. Super well. So, yeah, that's like turn 1, and then turn 2, I'm like, okay, I'm going to try to do the same thing. Turn 2, my secondaries are like, something terrible, I have to charge, 2 Kaskin units into his deployment zone or something weird like that, okay, not amazing. But I'm kind of keeping him off the board, so to speak. I've got my Bulgrin right in the middle of the board, and so so the same thing happens again. I do the mortar, fields of fire, he armor of contempts, etc., etc. And then there's one really funny part of this game where it's turn 3, and I'm genuinely feeling like quite behind at this point because the secondaries have been so incredible. Turn 3, I roll my first Manticore, right, Mick? I'm like, okay, number of shots. I'm like,
here
1.
we go.
I'm like, oh. And the thing is, I've got 2 CP. And I really wanted to save a CP for a charge reroll here. And I can't go down to 0 CP because then I only have 1 in his turn, so I can't respawn the Kaskin unit. I was like, you know what, Ed? I'm like, I'll CP roll the number of shots. And Ed's face is like, no. And I just looked at Maddie, I was like, rolled it, 6 banger.
Oh, boom.
Oh, it was such a... Everyone was cracking up. And I killed another 5 Terminators and Librarian. So that was kind of the nail in the coffin. Like, once my indirect had lined up that well against him, it was really tough for him. And at the same time, he drew like tempting target. He had to commit like 3 strike marines to the middle objective, which my Bulgrin could just charge, not even move and trigger missed. So it was like a 6-inch charge or something like that. So I didn't even have to miss, so he couldn't even mist away. So any chance where I could get my my non-indirect to commit into his army, it was huge, right? So he was trying to hide away from all my pieces that weren't indirect as much as possible, which is, I think, the right way to play it. So it was a really cool finals, 91-55. The score doesn't really reflect how close it was because in the end there I had a couple of big spikes where that opened up backfield objectives, his deployment zone, where I could get my Kaskin and use the plasmas to really shoot down some of these 2-up base save marines, which it's really good against. But pretty happy with that one. And
well played.
Yeah, that's how you win a finals.
Gosh, amazing! You must have been buzzing after that. It's a great achievement, man. So well done, and you did it for the Guard as well, your favorite faction. So it's pretty awesome.
Cool is I won the previous Southampton tournament, beating Manichima in the finals with Guard as well, with 30 Kaskin. So
there you go. It's come back round.
Yeah. There we go. Yeah. So I guess I've been monologuing for a bit, Vic. But what are some of your takeaways? Like, is there anything that really strikes you out as like, that's really interesting, or some things that you would like to see changed, maybe, or what's your opinion on indirect, right? Because I guess at the same time, my indirect was really powerful against Terminators, where I can stack a lot of synergies and buffs and kill them really well, but probably wouldn't have been good against. Manticore's not great against gargoyles or something like that, for example, right?
Yeah, it's a tough one because the meta, and this is the whole reason why Guard are quite good. Obviously, if we were in a very hoardy meta, Guard could tech for it, but we're in an extremely elite kind of meta where, the indirect fire does work well. It's base AP2 on both the Basilisk and the Manticore. That's actually really, really good. And there's a lot of ways of improving both the hitting side of things and also the AP with Fields of Fire. So Guard, rightfully so, have the best indirect in the game.
Yep.
But there is an issue, obviously, when you make indirect too good, that it creates this issue where a lot of armies can't play against you purely because you have indirect. The flip side to it is a lot of armies would struggle to play against Manny's list without indirect. So there's...
let's just caveat something. Manny's list has 3 support platforms, which is 375 points of indirect, and then it has 6 units, which is like another 500 points of stuff that will fire in phase, right?
Yeah, so. I mean, D-cannons are good as well, but... Okay, so there's a distinction between indirect that you can play against and indirect that you can't play against. When it has a little bit of shorter range and is on a much more fragile platform, especially slow-moving platforms, it's kind of more easy to manage than the very long-range indirect that's been quite oppressive. I think D-cannons are brilliant, and they're brilliant because they have the indirect fire keyword, but they come with weaknesses that people can play around. The Manticores and the Basilisks are very good, and we have certainly seen indirect be much stronger than what Guard is like at the moment.
Yeah.
But a big part of the power of Guard, and the reason why it's at times probably oppressive to play against in singles and even in teams, is because indirect is still a little too good. But they're not far off. I think they're really getting there with indirect fire. What do you think, Dave?
It's really interesting, man. Obviously, so just for context for the listener, this is an ongoing discussion for the last 4 years, I think, for both teams that Vic and I have been in, right? So, it's a commonplace sentiment here. But the thing about Guard is that if you don't synergize multiple things together, any piece you play is actually quite weak in and of itself. A Manticore, for example, against the Terminators, right? They would just take 3 up saves against that without anything. Or with AOC, they could even take 2 up saves. Mm-hmm. So you're basically not actually killing that many. And then your opponent can even CP reroll, for example. A Basilisk, for example, doesn't actually do amazingly into anything just in and of itself. It's the fact that you have to pump multiple synergies into it being good. Like in the Terminator case, effectively 4 CP worth, plus a spot, plus admittedly rolling quite well as well.
But so, Dave, you can say that, but you've got a Manticore killing an entire Grey Knight Terminator unit. There's I mean, sure, you have to put a lot of stuff into it, but the fact that it even happens is an issue. Yeah.
And that's one of the more extreme use cases, I would say, right? Like that's where you can hit something that's expensive, it's priced pretty high, it's got 3 wounds, it's like there is nothing more perfect for it to go into in that case, which is a shame if you're a Grey Knight player, right? Like
for sure.
That just sucks, right? Or Custodian Guard or something like that, right? But they can -1 damage, which is quite good. So that's where it's absolutely at its best, right? Like Chosen, for example, right? It was absolutely fantastic at killing Chosen. So it's a play. It really thrives when it succeeds. But on the flip side of that, you've got Guard. A lot of pieces are actually quite poor. Like a tank commander is quite poor. Some of the infantry is, not amazing. Obviously, Kaskan are great. Catachan Jungle Fighters are good, good in little parts. But a lot of those pieces I've found after playing it for a long time can be very inconsistent unless you synergize pieces into them. And there's only so much synergization you can push into, get out of your army, so to speak. So a lot of your pieces kind of end up working in and of themselves. So, yeah.
So my take on Guard is, I think all of those pieces you mentioned are good. They're not brilliant. Like Bulgrin, Kazakin, all of these things, even the reinforcement strat, they're all good.
Are brilliant. I think that's fair to say.
I think they're very good. I'm convinced they're not top of their class, to be honest.
Sure. Yeah.
But I think you could remove any of those elements and put something else like equally as good in there without a problem. But you can't take the indirect away from Guard and expect them to perform at anywhere near the level they're performing at the moment. The indirect fire is what is better than anything else in the game.
Sure.
And that's what's underpinning the strength of the army. And then you build other elements around it to make a more cohesive list design, which you've obviously done beautifully here.
Yeah, and it's not that the indirect tables people. Like obviously in the Grey Knight example, it's really strong. It's that it creates a pressure in the game where your opponent has to play into it, and then you've got so much dynamic play from your reinforcement strat. Like you're effectively playing a 2,400 point army, right? You're respawning your Kaskin every single turn that you can. And then the ability to come in on their backfield is really paramount, right? Because they want to push into the board. You've got good primary play in the middle of the board, and then you can come in on the back of their board as well. So, and having the units that you can just not YOLO 9-inch charge, you don't really care if they die, to flip their home field objective is a huge threat as well. So your opponent ends up having to play lots of parts of the board. I mean, without the indirect fire, Manny would have just absolutely cakewalked me, right? Would have been no game in it whatsoever.
Yeah, I think, if you imagine the indirect fire was, they didn't have the heavy keyword, you couldn't order for +1 to hit, there was a less point of AP and damage on the Manticore, and it didn't have reroll hits, which is perfect. That is how it potentially could have been written.
That sounds terrible.
It sounds terrible, but that is how it could have been written, and potentially pointed at a relatively cheap level for Guard.
Yeah.
And that would have been a very different story to what we're talking about now. Guard are seriously pushed on their profile on indirect fire compared to the rest of the game, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's true. It kind of goes down to your philosophy on it too, right? Like, for example, you wouldn't win many games playing 7 indirect pieces, right?
Correct.
Like, you just wouldn't. Like, that's not how the army functions. It functions with a bit of pressure from the indirect, or depending on what army you're playing against. For example, Space Marines, for example, right? Like a Storm Raven gunship list, or just a Black Templars and Iron Storm. It's actually a really tough time for Guard, or it was a pretty tough time, right? Because actually, indirect is really bad against that. It's actually shockingly bad, because most of your indirect wounds their tanks on 5s, and they can AOC, which negates basically all of your AP, and they're on a hull, so you don't get any rerolls. So there's some things that's bad against, and Wraiths, it's pretty poor against as well, right? Like a Manticore, maybe kills a Wraith, for example. So there's some things that lines up poor against, but it does feel it's a bit of a shame that it does feel quite oppressive if an army like Guard is good, suddenly models like Grey Knight Terminators and stuff like that are really hard to justify playing in a singles environment because you can run into that matchup where it's going to be they're just going to line up so well against you that it's going to be very difficult to overcome.
Yeah. So, Guard strong, indirect fire strong, but
Yep.
Guard overall as a list has a lot of really good elements in it that come
Very
together
fast
very
too.
nicely.
A lot of people really underestimate the speed of the list.
And also, we are not doing double orders.
No,
No one's doing that.
no,
Stop. That was another thing people said. Oh, Guard are only good because these guys are doing like the same order on
like
Kazakin twice.
triple rapid fire or something like that.
Yeah,
No,
no one's doing
no,
that. Just stop.
yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, I like my Chimera was so good for me every single game. It had the ability to just stage right in the middle of the board and then launch my Kaskin from that, and then just charge it into something, whatever like that. Do some secondaries or just YOLO it around the battlefield, right? Like. It's an army that you want to use all of your forward resources as much as possible, and rightfully so, no one took bring it down against me, which is an auto loss if you basically take it against a guard player because they will lock in, play super passive, and you'll be needing to push them even faster, which is the wrong thing to do, really. So
Yeah, makes a lot of sense, man.
yeah, it was fun.
Oh,
Nice.
what a
Pretty
run!
good,
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to spend 2 minutes on this
Sure.
because I know a lot of people have been messaging me about me taking a Skathach Wraith Knight to
what does that even
to a GT this weekend.
Yeah.
I only went to a small one. I only went for one day.
Yeah.
I got some really nice games in, and I got to try out running big stuff rather than super MSU Eldari.
Yeah.
The Skathach Wraith Knight is a Wraith Knight base which has like a little jump pack on the back. So once per game, it can kind of redeploy itself somewhere else.
That's only once per game.
Yeah, it's just once per game.
Oh, I thought it was every turn it could do it.
No, oh my god, it would be very good with that. But it synchronizes very well with a lot of the synergies in Eldari, where you could do this jump and then fire and fade and move into a safe position. It's Titanic, so it can really get nice angles towing into terrain. The
Yep.
weapon profile is also very relevant, being Melter 2 with Strength 12 Melter guns, and it's got 8 shots and some Star Cannon shots. It plays into the kind of attrition playstyle that Eldari like. Now, I had a real test because the first round I hit was against Josh Roberts.
Oof,
And
that's a stinger, mate.
yeah. So I played into his Canoptech court. He's obviously got loads of experience with it. And, I tried to think of all of these different strategies and ways that I could play the game. And, on paper, people look at Canoptech court and they're just like, okay, it's AP1 on the rates. Everyone focuses on the rates.
Yeah.
And the rates are just a distraction tactic for everything behind it. The rates kind of push you into positions where if you want to engage these guys that are disrupting your primary, you end up throwing yourself out of position. And that's basically what happens. I can't leave these 6 rates standing next to the only objective I could possibly hold in the game.
Yeah.
And so I go in, I tag them up, shoot them with the Skathach Wraith Knight, and I'm like, right, I've got a Skathach Wraith Knight here, -1 to wound. How is he going to kill this with like 2 units of immortals? And that's it. But then, obviously, he puts the Acanthrites in, gets an extra point of AP. Illuminus Eras gives the immortals another point of AP. Yep. He then has 3 Plasmancers that throw mortal wounds in. He swipes me with a few Wraiths. And then he shoots his devastating wound guns at me. And before I know it, I'm down to 2 wounds left before he's charged me with a unit of Wraiths. And it's like, so there's so much single target damage here off a tiny portion of his arm. He didn't shoot a Doomstalker at me, Dave. He didn't shoot a Doomstalker at the rates. Like, he couldn't get an angle with the Doomstalkers. And he still put me down to 2 wounds. And and then obviously the Avatar melts the next turn. And then I just have like a random splattering of chaff. My D-cannons never get a proper target. And, maybe I can kill a unit of Wraiths. I almost killed a second one, but really his entire army is intact behind it. So awful first matchup. But then I got to test it out a little bit as the tournament went on.
You got to play with your toys.
Yeah, I got to play a nice game against Orcs as well. And it was fun. I think the list archetype is very good. I would say with Eldari, in this meta, I think they're quite good in teams. Yes. Because they have some distinctly good matchups. And I think they're consistent across the board except for 2 or 3 matchups which you can avoid in teams.
Yeah.
So you've got to babysit them a little bit, but once they can prey on something, they really go for it. And
Do you prefer the Skathach Wraith Knight, or do you like the MSU build like such that Manny played, for example?
I mean, I was playing the MSU build before, and
Yeah.
I think it does suit me a lot more
Yeah.
as an individual player, because I prefer having things like I prefer to just throw away units just to move block stuff, and buy me momentum and tempo, which you don't really have access to when you're playing the big stuff. The big stuff, your opponent is free to do what they want, but they're not going to be able to shoot you, but they can move how they want.
Yeah.
No movement control in Eldari is actually really tough to deal with. I played a scrim game yesterday against John Lennon, like a little USA versus Ignite one, and the ability, and I had 20 units, right, in my list, 20. So average points cost 100 points. And I managed to move block him on 2 sides for half of the game.
Yep. Ranges, man.
The ranges were lots of little move blocking and just slowing him down, and managed to win a game which I can win because I had all the tools there.
Yeah.
Whereas with the Skathach and things, it's a little bit more unpredictable how you're going to actually score your points and push a high score. So
you have to focus on removing your opponent from the table.
Exactly. And it's swingy. It's so swingy. The output of Eldar is low volume, high quality. And it just kind of, all of a sudden, you just don't quite do enough damage, especially when you're relying on D cannons for a good chunk of the damage. So I would say Eldari have a weak matchup into a few armies. Grey Knights, Sisters, Guard, Necrons, the Canoptek Court, and
Sisters?
probably...
Okay.
Sisters, I think, is a consistent win for Sisters, to be honest. It's one of the worst matchups for Eldari. And you can see that, say, if you look at Pyra Cup and the results there. Even my experience playing against like Liam and things with Sisters, I found Sisters is a very good game for Sisters versus Eldari.
Interesting, yeah.
Because
Sisters
they just...
Sisters haven't been as popular in the UK for singles, I presume.
Yeah, well, we've got Jack Tithe here, but otherwise I kind of dropped off it a little bit. I think it's still very, very strong. But again, Sisters has a weakness to guard. Grey Knights are good across the board, have a weakness to guard. I really think Canoptek Court and Guard come out as the armies which are strongest. And I would argue Canoptek Court a little bit more. It has less bad matchups than Guard. Definitely. We saw Nassim go 4-2 this weekend with Guard.
And that example, Nassim is a fantastic player as well. Obviously not as good as Guard player as I am, but Nassim is a fantastic player as well. And actually, he lost to a list, the Space Wolves list, that is insanely good against Guard. Like
very good.
Everything like that matchup is so tough. And then he played Josh Roberts as well in like a close game. You couldn't win, and that's the same experience I had against the Wraiths as well. So I think the Wraith Canoptek Court list is does kind of pip everything right, because the Guard game is actually good. For Guard, you need a lot of those inconsistencies to high roll, which is unfortunate. It's not a great position to be in, right? Because that army ultimately is going to be quite stat checky, it's a bit of a shame that it exists in today's meta, because today's meta is quite balanced. But that army does feel extremely, you roll dice at them, they roll dice back at you. But,
I think they're both armies where if you have a very good player on them, it's completely different to playing someone else. Exactly, both Canoptek Court and Guard, they just feel like a completely different game.
That kind of segues us into something. I tell you what, here's what I'm going to do. We're going to go for a bit of elevator music, give a bit of a break, and there's something I want Vic to touch on, and look at today's meta post. So we'll be
What's
back.
What's going on?
Music. I need to bring up his post.
There must be more copyright music copyright-free music than this. I love one comment said this is what plays in all of Dave's chimeras.
My Lehman Russ song. The chimera is the best actually, it's just dirtily, it's just charge you, deploy some homers, those are the runs. Alright, cool. And there's no fade out though. Here we go. Stone Cold Turkey, back into it. There's a larger conversation here, and I'm cautious that we're already an hour 20. But Vic, if we look at today's Meta Monday post, one thing that really struck out at me was the number of players of that faction that went X-1 or X-0. So went 1 loss or undefeated. Guard had one of the lowest of that. So it had 4 out of 43 players go X and 1 or X and O, obviously myself being one of them. But if you compare that to some factions, Orcs had 3 out of 33, so basically the same as that, right? So kind of a very similar parallel there. Eldari had 22% of their players, so double that number.
Yes.
And then Space Marines, only 3 of the 45 players making it to the top tables, which is just bizarre because Space Marines are super powerful as well. So kind of what do you make of those win rates? Because, over the last weeks, we've been chatting about win rates, what do they mean, etc., etc. Kind of what are your kind of takeaways on stuff like that?
I think there are 2 main points. And I know there's an obvious one, but I think there's a less obvious one here, which is when you just look at those numbers, you could easily go and say, oh, Eldari are the stronger army than God. There's no doubt looking at those numbers that Eldari are a better army. But if you had to choose, like even me, I'm an Eldari player. If I had to choose between taking Eldari to try and win an event and God to try and win an event, or if I'm trying to take something for a team's event and trying to do better in the team,
Yeah.
I think God wins out twice, like
Yeah.
in both singles and teams. And that is not reflective of the statistics here.
Yep.
Which says a lot about what you're meant to take away from statistics. In research and things, there's so much context to every bit of data that you get. And I think a lot of context is lost even when you look at how much like armies are winning tournaments and stuff. I still think it loses a lot of context by what tournaments is it winning against what armies, with what players there, etc., etc., etc. And I think there's nowhere near there's no way of 40k data following that side of things, and this God saga has been one of the key showers of that almost.
Yeah, it's really exemplified the fact that 40k, especially early, things change really fast, so old data becomes inaccurate or irrelevant, right? And the fact of the matter is that you're working with small amounts of data that is highly subjective as well. It's not as if we're just pushing widgets out of a factory here. Things happen, swings happen. There's a lot of, you're comparing apples and oranges with almost every single tournament, right? Only almost the UKTC is one that you can compare back to back, right? Because we use the same terrain, same missions, relatively similar player pool, right? So yeah, I agree. One thing I thought was probably interesting as well is that maybe a lot of people have started playing Guard since we started talking about it, whereas the Eldari player base is probably, you've probably got a lot of people that have dropped off after it was nerfed, and then those players that have stuck with it still finding themselves with a strong army, and they are more practiced, so they're a bit better to go X and O or X and 1, for example, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It is a bit of a player base thing, and I feel bad to say that the God player base is like low skilled. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I think the kind of players that the Eldari player base would attract are players who play into some of the more high skill elements of 40k. So
Right.
you
So
might
you said the same thing, but just in a nice way and reverse.
Whereas I think God kind of people who would get like I wouldn't be attracted to God. I don't want like when I think of God, I think of a gun line. I think of like indirect fire in the back, like Lehman Russ tanks lined up, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So I would never be attracted to starting that army. And as a person who switches armies a lot, that's going to be much more significant for someone who doesn't switch armies a lot. They're not going to go to God.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of why we see some of these like more technical armies maybe have better win rates across the mid tables. But I think there's also one more point, and there is. It's been a while since I've seen such a divide between innovation in list design in the USA and the UK/Europe for
Yeah.
God, for a faction like God,
Mhm.
because normally it kind of meets somewhere there. People are on kind of
Yeah.
slightly different unit choices, but they're kind of roughly there.
Well, a lot of
But
people across the pond went with Eldari MSU. Those lists across UK and USA are pretty homogenous, right?
well, that's what I mean. So they both got some of the same elements in them,
Yeah.
but like in America, they love the big stuff, and in
Yeah.
UK and Europe, they love MSU and the little stuff. But God, it's just like the list design is so off for the top players in USA compared to UK, and the
Yeah.
impression of God as well. Like
Yeah.
I saw a battle report where top player was saying indirect fire isn't actually that good. for guard, which blows my mind. And obviously, that's going to trickle down to the community there, who are going to follow those kinds of opinions. And whereas in the UK, we see people doing very well with them, with respected opinions on guard.
Yeah.
And it's going to continue to trickle through Europe and UK much more than US as it stands.
But, in addition to that, Guard have had a pretty small top player base, I think, at the same time as well, right? I think who was playing Guard when I was playing LGT? Like, nobody. And then I played it at the 2 online team events and did really well, and then it kind of sparked up from there, right? When I was running first person run Cascade and stuff like that. So realistically speaking, it's a really small handful of players, and that hasn't really trickled down here in the UK at all as well,
Well, it's big because you and Nassim play it, who are two kind of more kind of newish players. They're actually pretty experienced now, both of you, but who've come in and both play guard. So that's a large proportion of our top player community.
But why do armies like Custodes, Necrons, Space Marines have huge fluctuations in their player bases depending on how perceived strength of that army is, whereas an army like Guard or Orcs, for example, just never would,
It's entirely dependent on number of colors required to paint the army. I find that armies with less like quantity of colors, like Custodes, are going to be the most popular. It's literally a gold spray and a wash, and you're done.
Yeah, that's definitely a component, Drukhari is the same though, right? Chaos Space Marines, right? Which, have, a lot of people gravitated towards playing those factions. But at the same time, obviously, Accursed Cultists, that was few and far between. I think that was the same circumstance. We had like maybe 1 or 2 people playing that in the UK here.
Also,
being very strong.
Do you want to play the superhuman gold armored scholars, the undead robots who have this like oldest race in the world?
No, man.
No, let's play the normal humans in their tags beings, with tracks.
I'm just a human being trying to make it in the 41st millennia. There we go. There we go. If I haven't tried to convince you enough to pick up Guard, improve that part of your game, then you know what? I can't sell it anymore, man. Go buy Guard today. You can be a regular-ass human being in the 41st millennia and throw fucking melter mines at people and just laugh as you deal 1 mortal wound to their infantry.
Fantastic. What an episode.
There we go. Episode 46. I fucking told you so. We told you so. If you didn't believe us, then maybe believe us and take us for our word next time. I went there. I did it. Guard are good.
It's not S tier, but it wins super majors.
There we go. Here's the extra.
Thank you for listening to the 40k Fireside podcast. Vic and I hope you've enjoyed listening, and we greatly appreciate any feedback that you can provide after the show.
Alright, I need to get another beer after that one.
That was a longer one.
That was
beautiful.